So, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pete Burden, and I'm your host today on the Healthy Power Alliance podcast. We're using this space to explore what it means to be powerful together, to look at how human power, particularly as it appears in organizations and in communities, can benefit other humans and the planet we all depend upon. We're speaking with people who are in the middle of doing that, people who think they know about how to do it, and people who are doing academic studies as well, of what, apparently really works and maybe what doesn't as well. We love theory, very interested in the theory around power, but mostly we're interested in practice, meaning what people actually do. And so with that said as a little introduction, let me get into our into the depths with our current guest, who's Paula Harriott. Hi, Paula.
Hello, hi Pete. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. I don't know too much about you. We've been introduced by a mutual colleague. I do know that you're chief executive of Unlock, and I know that Unlock is an organisation that works on behalf of people with criminal records. And then apart from that work, you've had a long history, I think, of kind of working on issues of equity and social justice. And I believe you're also an author. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I've actually just got a book being launched June the 16th. June 16th next month on prisoner leadership.
Fantastic, really good.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
It's examining the experiences of people in prison who are using their own agency and power in leadership. And exploring that concept in that book, which is often seen as a bit of an oxymoron, prisoner leadership.
Yeah. It sounds fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation actually, because of those kind of topics sound absolutely fascinating. But could you start by telling us a little bit more about you and your journey to becoming the chief executive of Unlock, and then maybe a little bit more about Unlock as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had a very unorthodox journey to becoming a CEO in some senses, my journey in criminal justice started with a prison sentence between 2004 and 2012. So I got an 8-year prison sentence for cocaine. So obviously incredibly disruptive to my life, incredibly disruptive to my children's lives, incredibly impactful on my children's lives, and was I think not my first, but my most severe experience of what it feels like to be powerless completely, what it feels like to be in the grip of the state, when the safety of living in the UK is completely stripped away. For me, there's this sort of inherent idea that we're sort of safe, that the systems that are in place are there to protect us. And when you're on the other side of that, you see the malevolence of the state rather than the benevolence of the systems. So, my experience of just being, you don't even have a name when you go to prison. You get given a number, MM4865. And that's your prison number, and that's the prison number that follows you through. When they call you out to come to reception over the tannoy, it's your number, then your surname. So Paula disappeared. My journey, my journey to becoming the CEO starts in that prison cell. I think it's because I think before that I wasn't particularly interested in having a career per se. I think I was, before prison, slightly bohemian, didn't really want to be involved in capitalism, didn't want to really be involved in mainstream, use drugs and live to sort of an alternative way of life. I think trying to scope that out. How do you? My husband is a Rastafarian, and so for us in those years, it was like the world of capitalism is Babylon, and you need to stay clear of Babylon as far as you can, and you try to build this alternative way of life, peace, love, unity. So that was where I started before prison, then going to prison, and coming out of prison after having that experience of being held captive, held captive, held captive, separated from your children, held in, really unpleasant conditions. Understanding what it then feels like to be a prisoner, but also subsequent to release, understanding what it feels like when the community doesn't want you, when the community doesn't trust you. I was outed in the Sun with a big piece, drug lag, let out to work in drugs rife Handsworth. What does it feel to be like to be vilified? And the power of the state, the power of the media to do that to people. Like I individually experienced that with my family. So very difficult period in my life, but also the launch pad for a whole sort of, I would call it, using your lived experience, trying to transform that pain to purpose, trying to rescue yourself from the banishment, trying to rescue your own identity and rebuild it with strength and purpose and vindication, and using these acts of resistance to the system as a place to grow your own power. That was very much so it's like conceptually very much my journey, and then I suppose practically always thinking in my practice beyond prison about how do we use our power, what that feels like to be powerless, what does that feel like to be in the grip of something that you can't control, which it was for those 4 years. You're in the grip of the system. You can choose to comply or not comply, but either way you're in the grip of the system. And coming out, I suppose it really got me thinking about hierarchies. It got me thinking about power. It got me thinking about mercy. It got me thinking about compassion. It got me thinking about class. It got me thinking about racism. It got me thinking about
a lot of things by the sound of it.
it just was like, it was like, in a way, a deep immersion those 4 years when I was in prison and 4 years when I was on license, a deep immersion in what's wrong with the system, but then what should be right. What's the alternative to that? And how do you spend your life trying to build those alternatives? And maybe I didn't have such a sophisticated analysis when I first started when I came out of prison in 2008, but that's developed over the years of immersion in the work and both personal reflective practice and professional practice around creating the world we want in the now.
Lovely. Thank
practicing
you.
in the micro in order to influence the macro.
Yeah. And I mean, you said visceral. I got a sense of it being very visceral, as well as generating lots of thoughts, this experience. So as you said, you considered loads of things, but the sense I was getting of the imprisonment, particularly the taking away of rights and so forth.
Well,
you're talking about
lack of power.
yeah, but you're talking about an embodied, a very visceral experience of that.
Terrible, yeah, like unforgettable. I mean, we should never imagine that prison in this country is like a holiday camp.
No.
We should understand what it really is. It's the deprivation of liberty of an individual, and the deprivation of their human rights to a large extent. And it's I would say a scar, like a deep scar. And I've tried to use that scar as momentum for change, rather than
Both for yourself.
for myself, for my children, my community, the world I live in, big thoughts, right? But not even, I don't think that was ever conscious. I just think it was a reaction to what I'd been through, a reaction to the first step is, I never want another woman to go to prison and suffer. I don't want any woman to go to prison for drugs. I don't want any woman to be separated from their children for 4 years. I don't want that for any children, and I don't want that for any people, man or woman in the end, really. But I think that it was, it's such an adversarial experience that the only way is to transform that into something positive.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you live with the pain of it, and it creates stagnation and helplessness. And I think that organizing against, or organizing as a consequence of, is a healing mechanism as well. It's like you take back control of the situation. And we hear about that in all types of recovery type work, the necessity to exercise your own agency, make your own choices, go forward, and use all the life experiences we have, both good and bad, as a sort of a form of human wisdom to help us carve out our space in the world.
Great. And as you said, for yourself, for your family, for your children, for your community, and then also you're doing this through Unlock. So do you want to say just a few words about Unlock as well?
I can. Yeah, I mean, Unlock is, I'm very proud to lead Unlock because it was founded 25 years ago by a group of prisoners. So it is a lived experience founded organisation, and I'm its most current lived experience leader. And in between, it's had leaders without lived experience, but with sort of, my appointment is like a return to the roots. And I'm really, really proud about that because, one thing I do see in the sector is like lived experience led organization, lived experience founded organizations sort of becoming assimilated into the wider ecosystem and not standing sort of firmly on their own. It's hard to survive, sometimes it's not a choice, but yeah, so I'm Unlock, and Unlock is campaigning for better. Our strapline is the long shadow of the criminal record. So we're talking about the long shadow of the criminal record. We're talking about what prison does to people. We're talking about not just the psychological impact, but actually, the sort of inability to work subsequent to a criminal record. So these like barriers to work, barriers to education, barriers to getting house insurance, car insurance, the sort of unfair by design stuff that keeps people with criminal records at arm's length, inability to travel, travel restrictions, can't go to the US next year. People with criminal records may find difficulty going to any EU country now that we're out of the EU, because there won't be an automatic visa waiver for a person who ticks the box, I have a criminal record. They'll be filtered into another system that might really be difficult. So there are a lot of sanctions on people with criminal records, and our work is creating the information so people know how to navigate the system, especially the disclosure and barring system, but also doing sort of policy work to try to change some of these barriers.
Great, lovely, thank you. And I'm fascinated by the experiences you had of prison and the effects of all of that as well. But I'm always asked this question as well. When did you first kind of experience power? Was it then, or did you have experience of power before?
I think awareness of.
Yeah.
Awareness of power starts at school. I think that I had a really natural anti-authoritarian streak. I didn't take well to school, and I was the first. So my family, my dad was a fitter at the dockyard. My mum worked in a shop. I would say we were like, upper working class, but my dad, we were the first kids who went to the grammar school from our community. So I suppose when I was at the grammar school, I suddenly became quite acutely aware of class differences. That was, just like years ago, like in the sort of 70s, 80s, this awareness of class and the awareness of, how you needed to comply in order to fit in, and the difficulties of that if you don't have the privileges that other people have. So awareness of class as a powerful controlling mechanism was probably like in my thoughts when I was sort of 13, 14, 15.
Mm-hmm.
And then I suppose in terms of the restrictions upon young women, accessing places and spaces, that you
Mm-hmm.
become very acutely aware of that, don't you? As a young woman growing up, you become aware about how, there are places where we're not safe, and power can be exercised against us that affects our physical well-being, our mental well-being, and learning to navigate those spaces. And then I think marrying a Jamaican man and realizing a sort of the vicarious trauma of witnessing racism at play in my children's life.
Mm-hmm.
These are powerful forces.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying? It's like
Absolutely,
cultural
yeah.
forces, and they're starting to feel really upset about that. Like they're naively going into that relationship without really a clear sense of that either.
Mm.
And through that, trying to unravel and through that relationship. Obviously, with my children to this day, how the forces of colonialism and the forces of racism are at play in our lives and the power they have in the cultural discourse. So, learning to not just suffer that, but to triumph over that. What are the what are the tools you need? What are the experiences you need? What are the characteristics you need to be able to navigate being a mother of children of color? For my children, how do they stand proud in these spaces and not get caught up or demoralized or sidelined or marginalized in those spaces? Yeah.
Right. Well, it sounds like you've had I mean, I guess everybody has a kind of a growing experience of power as life
Mm, mm,
changes,
mm.
as we go through different stages of life. But you've had a particular kind of journey, so it sounds like there's loads we can learn from you about those kind of practices, really. Just for the kind of people listening, I'd like to say we're taking, power can be seen as a very complicated kind of thing. It's a highly contested thing in academic writing, but we've got this very simple definition, which is basically just getting your needs met or getting your goals met, so that's what we mean by power. And when we talk about healthy power, we mean um, getting your needs met in a way that also has this effect of, rather than taking power away from other people, it
Yeah.
actually increases other people's power. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what do you think about that definition as a beginning point? But then also, yeah, I mean,
What
how
to
do you?
only to use the word like my power or the power that I can create
Yeah,
around me to
yeah, I'm
support others. So
interested.
we're not talking about
Yeah,
system power, so to speak, but more individualized or
well,
organizational collective power.
I'm just curious to know how you think about it really
I
first. I
think
mean,
I think it's a good starting point. So for
mm,
me, I don't in terms of being very solution focused and orientated towards a future,
mm,
you know, in some ways you have to free your so Bob Marley free yourself from mental slavery.
mm-hmm,
None but ourselves can free our minds. Yeah. So one of his lyrics. And I always use that as a starting point to think that, yeah, there's all these structural conditions around you, which I've pointed out, all the
mm,
negative experiences where you can feel constrained and constricted by forces that are bigger than you as an individual. But how do you withstand that? You have to dig deep and connect yourself to your own power of self-identity, your own power of purpose, your own power of carving out a life that is for you
mm-hmm,
within those constraints,
mm,
pushing back at the constraints to find enough space to be and to create enough space to be with your family,
mm,
your colleagues, your comrades, your community. So I think it starts with yourself thinking what is it about me that is powerful,
Mm.
And so I've written quite a bit around refuting labels. For instance, as a woman who's been to prison, refuting labels of vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
and seeking identities of power. So the writing, so in terms of how discourse around, how when we live in these, we live within the discourse of vulnerability. So, people, women who've been to prison, or they're all vulnerable, from trauma, victims of coercive control, experiences of domestic violence, and it drives this sort of sympathy towards this group. These notions of vulnerability that people leverage in order to elicit sympathy, which actually doesn't change anything.
No.
But it's like a technique. I say death to the misery memoirs and death to the trauma porn, because for people who are then subject to that discourse, so when I'm working and described as a vulnerable woman who went to prison, it drains my own individual power. So I'm sort of very much about refuting those labels.
And can I ask them?
Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a huge amount of sense.
So I try to be like, not let, even those can all simultaneously be true with an identity of strength, right?
Sure.
It's like we can operate across paradigms.
Sure.
These things can, it can be true. All of those things can be said about me, but my deeper truth is that I'm a survivor. My deeper truth is that I can harness wisdom through these lived experiences, and I can elevate that into sophisticated conversations that can become transformational, both for myself, for people who are my nearest and dearest, but also, the people with whom I share my wisdom and work collectively for change.
Sure.
So I sort of don't really delve into publicly into any discussions about vulnerability on an individual level. I will work on those in my personal life. I will reflect on which part I can fix from which I can't, but I will purposefully and intentionally work to develop an identity of strength. And any power that I have in terms of persuasive or interactions with others, or relationships with organizations, institutions, I try to act in ways where I am both kind, challenging, simultaneously. So I think
Yeah, no, that's great.
I think there's a duality about how we are powerful that is both anchored in our own acknowledgement of our vulnerability, but also in our acknowledgement of our own power and the power of collectives.
Of course. And this is great. And you've mentioned kind of three forms of what I would call kind of practice already. You've talked about kind of writing, you've talked about conversation, and you've talked about reflecting.
Yeah.
Taking those, and we're mainly interested in theory, in practice here.
Yeah.
When you talk about writing, so you have written a book and you are writing. So
I publish papers. Yeah.
and is the writing then you're doing it to kind of educate other people, or are you writing for yourself and your own development? Bit of both. Okay.
I think sometimes when I write stuff, it's because I'm contending with it emotionally myself, or
Yes.
I'm and sometimes it's cathartic to get it out and put it on
Yes.
paper and read it
Yes.
back to yourself and go, oh, okay,
Yes.
that's what I
Okay.
mean then, so I
Yeah.
think that it's developmental for me as much as
Yes.
anything. Everything in my life I think is developmental
It's
for me.
developmental. Okay.
I feel like growing in your knowledge and understanding, trying to develop wisdom, human wisdom, is our contribution to the world.
Very nice. Okay.
That's our power.
Okay.
That's our power.
Our power. Okay.
Yeah, and I think you have to step away from ego to build collectives. I think, there's so much, people say, oh, charismatic leader or whatever, but I think it's actually about no sustainable change comes unless you're with a committed group of comrades to do
Sure.
that work together, and have a network of people with whom you can connect and, you know, like join in power with them for change. But yeah, writing is developmental for me, and yeah, I publish it just to share my thoughts with the world if I think they're interesting enough.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's great.
If they're interesting enough, and yeah. So
What about the conversational practice? And you mentioned that as well, and you're starting to talk about how, you know, you do create that community, or you do build that team in your organization and so forth. What could you say a
really
little bit more about
important.
your conversational practice?
So I
What's
think
involved?
my conversation. So I'm an absolute networker. You know, I think when I analyze my skills personally, I think their engagement. I think I'm curious about other people.
Mm-hmm.
Genuinely, I'm curious because I'm always looking to learn, and
Mm.
like conversations are ways in which we absorb knowledge of the other's knowledge. And, you know, they're like knowledge exchange moments, aren't they? So if you're a
Mm-hmm.
curious person about yourself and curious about your place in the world and curious about how you want to be better, grow, you know, into old age with like pride, you know, and that's I'm interested in spiritual knowledge. I'm interested in political knowledge. I'm interested in being challenged all the
Mm-hmm.
time to check my positions so that I don't stagnate as a person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to stagnate. That would be like the death of me.
So you're taking a position of curiosity in those conversations,
all the
and
time.
then you're also inviting kind
But
of
so I'm,
challenge and
so I'm
things like that, are
inviting,
you?
yeah, and I'm inviting, you know, testing, was there iron sharpens iron.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I'm looking for the the joy of a deep conversation. I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking for being taught
Mm-hmm.
as much as teaching. Yeah.
Sure.
So being taught is probably my deepest quest.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in the curiosity of looking for being taught, you become you know, there's mutual knowledge exchange, and you can learn. You can sometimes gift somebody with a piece of knowledge, can't you? And
Sure.
sometimes you get gifted knowledge, and then it
Sure.
all assimilates. So, and then it assimilates into power and
Great.
authority and confidence. I hope.
Great. Well, good. No, it's lovely. Thank you. I mean, could you then give some examples maybe of the things that you're talking to people about now? I mean, when in your conversational
Okay, so I
practice, what are
talk.
the things
I,
that are
yeah,
important?
I'm always looking. I focus in on leadership. So one of my big conversations is around the integration of people with lived experience of the criminal legal system into the work of the sector, you know, and why that doesn't happen, and what are the barriers to that happening, and how do people refute the ideas of vulnerability and transform those into leadership so they can lead conversations with authority.
Mm-hmm.
So in those conversations with people, I'm looking for I'm daring, I suppose, to demonstrate the possibility of that.
In that you're
Uh,
doing it yourself, you're trying to
yeah,
refute that
yeah, yeah,
vulnerability
yeah.
yourself. But
That's
how do
right.
you encourage others to? I mean, other
So,
than rather just telling them that they should also refute their
no,
vulnerability, kind of thing.
I've built lived experience leadership programs.
Right, I see.
So like
Okay.
I build programs of that people can come on to and start do personal development work.
Okay.
So like I've built a couple of those, and then I do group work, sort of groups in prison that are related to sort of getting people to think about how they can survive and create identities of strength in those constrained places. And so we will have like group work that touches on issues of power, resistance, solidarity, you know, what you can personally do in your practice,
Okay.
you know. So I'm, yeah, both seeking to learn and to teach simultaneously around survival, I think, and how self leadership is an important concept even within a political acknowledgement of the structural and systemic barriers that power of the state brings to those spaces, that individuals can, notwithstanding all that, learn from that. You know, if at the very least you learn never to operate like that, you know, that these are adversarial learning situations where at the very least you learn never operate like that. You know, don't be that person. Do not be authoritative in that way. Don't be coercive. Don't be controlling. You know, so we'll be, you know, I suppose I'm always like flipping the script on what you can learn from these experiences of negative power as a way forward, as a guide and a signal to how to be and how to vibrate differently in the spaces that we work in. And that it may seem overwhelming to break down all these negative like experiences, but actually they're reframing them as learning and reframing them as like learning how to be better and how we like you know, that if we work in a group, if we work in a collective, if we work more broadly. So my work outside of prison most recently has been like about movement building and about bringing networks together. So I founded a network called the Prisoner Policy Network when I was working at the Prison Reform Trust. You know, 1,500 prisoners coming together to discuss policy issues. And now at Unlock, launching a membership campaign. We've got 9,000 people on our membership list, but trying to build them into a sort of an idea of connectivity rather than being just a subscriber to the network. So that we can build a collective, powerful voice. And also just recently starting something called the Experience for Justice Collective, which is a collective of people who've been impacted by the criminal legal system, researchers, allies, interested individuals coming together to write about that experience, to mobilize around actions. So that's in its infancy, but and that's where my latest practice is in like movement building, network building, convening spaces where people can come together to talk about where they can experience solidarity, which is a power. You know, they can experience solidarity because for so many people in our communities, we have very little experiences of solidarity with, you know, even within families. You know, sometimes we don't have solidarity even within our siblings. That's one thing. So just talking about the merging of professional and personal practice, you know, I'm really hot on my kids getting on and like holding on to one another. I have an experience in my personal life where, you know, I'm not that close to my siblings. And I think that's so sad, you know, and, you know, take great pride in the fact that my 5 kids, you know, are like move as a unit. And like, you know, and I know what that takes to make that happen.
Well, what does it take to make it happen? I mean, again, in terms
it
of
takes
practice,
negotiating power for my kids,
and what
supporting them to understand that you have more in common than you have in difference, right? That arguments and different perspectives can be resolved by coming with compassion and mercy for each other, that you can engage in learning together around your differences. You can applaud difference but still have collective common purpose. These are sort of big lessons that I've been like delving into with my kids. And my kids challenge me nonstop, you know. Like I love my kids because they're like my adult children are my deepest critics. So I go to them for criticism because I'll get it. You know, people who love you give you the deepest and most heartfelt criticism. And you have to be ready to absorb that if you want to be a warrior in life. You have to be ready to like go, okay, let me hear the worst you've got. Let me see if it's true. You know, let's see if it's actually true as well, because different perspectives can be true about us, you know, and we need to surround ourselves with people who are like our wing mirrors on the car, you know, who cover up our blind spots.
Of course. And again, as I've said, I'm interested in the practice. So even at the kind of behavioral level, you know, the mixture, for example, with your family of listening and talking, how have you managed that? And when you're doing the community building you're talking about, or when you're teaching people how to learn, at a behavioral level, is there something different than you're doing? I mean, I imagine with
I
your
think
kids,
it's
you
about
don't just tell them,
oh God,
you're,
no, it's
no. So what
founded.
are you doing? Is what I'm
Well, it's
interested in.
it's deeply founded in trust, isn't it?
How do
So
you engender trust with them? I mean, I know they trust you naturally,
consist.
I suppose,
No,
but
not
mm,
necessarily, because I let them down and I went
mm,
to prison. So that
fair enough.
disrupts
Yeah,
that, doesn't it? So
of
there are deep
course,
scars then.
of course. So how
So I
did you
think
overcome that? I guess that's what I'm interested in.
consistency, turning up all the
Okay,
time. Don't let
okay.
people down. If you say you're
hmm
going to do something,
Great.
do it. So,
Real integrity in that way. Yeah.
deep personal integrity. So I
Mm,
think
mm,
that this comes from deep personal accountability.
hmm
I think that you can't do this work if you don't do the work on yourself.
hmm
The work
hmm
is more on yourself, because the
mm,
magic happens, which emerges from the deep work within yourself.
hmm
So
hmm
people are attracted to that.
Sure.
They feel that. They feel that
Mm,
you are doing the work, that you're open, that you're curious, that you're persistent, that
mm,
you've got character, that you act with integrity, you don't lie.
mm,
You can stay open in difficult
mm,
moments. You don't close down
mm.
conversations. You're not
Great. Lovely.
you're not you're not brusque. Sometimes I'm not perfect. Sometimes the kids say, "Mum, shut up." Yeah, but it's like,
Mm,
it's that commitment to seeking and uncovering the deepest truths of yourself.
That's all the person. Thank you. That's what I was interested to hear, and I'm sure what the listeners will be interested to hear. So all that personal practice, and then as you say, kind of modeling that the
Yeah.
right balance of speaking and listening and so forth. I'm also really curious to know then. So you talked about the community building work you're doing, and also
Yeah.
you said about bringing leadership training into prisons
Uh-huh.
and so forth. How do you go about that when although you're trying to come from this position, which is that the personal work is the most important, and yet presumably when you're trying to persuade people that have got money to pay for that in a prison, or I don't know how it works exactly, but somebody's kind
Mm.
of paying for it or something like that. How do you? They're operating in a very different way of thinking. So how do you work with those two things simultaneously?
How do
Your
you work
own.
with getting money from funders to do
Well,
work that is
funders is
liberation work?
funders is an example, but I imagine it's not easy necessarily to start a leadership program inside a prison.
No,
Maybe it
no,
is. I don't know.
no. I
How do
think
you do all that? I suppose
it's how do you frame your work, isn't it? So like,
framing. Yeah.
it's all framing. So
Mm,
for me, my work, which has, as I said, will always. I'm seeking change
mm,
in both people and institutions,
mm,
and there are plenty of people who can see the need for that change.
mm, mm,
And I think if you come with an offer that people can sense is going to contribute to that change, then I think you find people who will give you the support to do that.
mm.
So ultimately within all systems of power, it's about people, isn't it? And their
Of
own
course.
and their the way they exercise their power. So I think that when you are operating and working in this way, that's like about inclusivity, that's about, deep deeply deep care and support, and seeking to like give people, share what you've found about how you've exited from the trenches,
Mm,
and you're saying, look, here's a way forward. I've used this technique, I've used this
mm,
strategy, and it's worked for me.
mm, mm.
I think that when people can see that or sense that, it's like an embodied knowledge. It's like an
Yeah.
intuition, isn't it?
Mm,
People sense that, and then they gravitate towards that. So
mm,
it's like you know, I think people sense it, and so in life, I think that I haven't ever, since I've started to become working in this way, I've always found like a coalition of the willing.
I was going to use the word coalition or allyship or something
Yeah,
like
no,
that. It's absolutely.
yeah, I found
Mm,
them and they found
mm,
me. Do you
mm,
know what I mean?
mm,
Lincoln,
mm,
like
mm,
we've come together on this podcast through a mutual
mm,
connect, right? And we seem to find each other some way. You put the call out, and it's a weird sort of connectivity. Somebody told me it's like the roots of plants under the surface are all interconnected. Like, is it mycelium? I
Something
think
like
it's
that.
called,
I know this stuff. Yeah.
that those really fine little roots.
Yeah.
But on the surface, we all look very separated.
Yes.
But actually, once you start watering one of these plants, then the roots grow. They touch another root, and then they start to develop. I think that's a nice way to look at my work.
Yes.
Is that I do believe if you want to call it success, because I genuinely have been part of step changes and cultural changes in the criminal justice sector over the last 15 years, is totally bound up in personal practice, and personal practice that has been molded by practice in my personal life, by practice with my family, healing the wounds, and the absorption and the curiosity for more knowledge in order to be more effective and more. So it's you have to keep it moving. You have to keep it
and modeling all of that as
all
you
the
do
time.
it.
Yeah, you can't stagnate, and it's hard work, because then you become like, even though you may not seek it, you become a leader.
As you have.
Yeah, but I didn't really seek it, if you know what I mean.
No,
Like, it
no.
wasn't. It's like a journey, and then with that leadership comes responsibility, and that responsibility can feel quite heavy sometimes.
Could you
And
talk a little bit more about that? We were talking about it just before the call as well, about the
just suddenly
difficulty.
you've got responsibility, and sometimes the expectation of others is that you'll use power to corral them. And then sometimes you can think, well, actually, I really ought to do that, because if my kids are doing something dangerous, I'm going to stop them, aren't I? So then you have this responsibility around telling people what to do, or advising people about what to do, or even ordering people to do something in your role as a CEO. Like, look, you need to do this. And I'm, it's a new experience for me. So I'm still, I don't have fully formed thoughts on it at the moment. I can tell you that in my practice, I try to be really collective. I try to do collective decision making. I try to be really transparent. I try to not hold on to knowledge. So I try to, invite people to meetings with me, to come meet important people, share my networks, in the belief that the more people who are trained in these spaces and competent in these spaces, the better for the impact and the end user and the end game, so to speak.
Okay.
But then you're faced with, are people doing the work at the same rate?
Yeah.
Is the depth of understanding of the mission the same? And how do we level that out? What type of work is that? What type
So again,
of
how do you do that?
work that? Well,
You're in the throes of doing it,
I'm
are you, at
probably
the
in the
moment?
throes of contending with that. Like,
Mm,
how, as a political activist who believes in equity and inclusivity and knowledge equity, deal with the need for expertise.
for example, yeah.
Yeah, and at what pace do we go? Is it my pace? And that's hard.
People sometimes say the speed of trust, don't they, as a way out.
Okay,
But
go on.
the speed
And
of
it's hard
trust,
because that takes, exactly. And then, you have to work really, really hard on that.
So we're probably moving towards the time we need to stop, but I just wanted to give you a chance to just say anything else that you think is kind of relevant to this whole idea of power or healthy power, or and the practice of healthy power. Might there be practices that you'd particularly recommend, or anything like that? But anything else you'd want to say,
I
really?
think you have to practice meditation.
Uh-huh.
I find meditation really helpful in curbing egotistical like speed.
Hmm.
You know, like you sometimes go, well, by any means necessary as a political activist, you know, no matter, like I'll just do it anyway. And they think, no,
Hmm.
you gotta stop, man, you gotta like slow it down, gotta bring people with you. And meditation's helped me in terms of like reflecting on behaviors in meetings and
Mm.
interpersonal relationships
Hmm.
about a little bit more humility.
Mm.
Because I think as you get success, you sense, you know, movement, and you've opened up spaces and you've made connections. It is very ego can be very beguiling in those moments
Mm.
to
Mm.
the detriment of healthy power.
Mm.
So I think getting this reflective practice, getting a coach has actually been very good for me as well.
Mhm.
You know, therapist, coach, whatever you want to call it, but getting
Mm.
somebody who's not connected to you, who gives you just critical feedback from a different standpoint is good. You know, it can
Mm.
be painful, but it's good.
Mm.
And I think, you know, trying to be receptive all the time to uh, body language, energy, you know, trying to work out what you're feeling
Mm.
as clues to where you might need to do more on yourself or where you might have to share something with somebody else. And that's hard as well, isn't it? Like I find it easier to receive feedback than necessarily to give it.
Mm.
Because I'm always wondering if I'm overstepping the mark in terms of like respect for the other person's pace and journey.
Mm.
But sometimes we've got a mission. So, you know, we're on a mission. At work,
Mm.
we're on a mission. So we've got to be able to find a way to work as a team
Mm.
to max out the impact. So, you know, but these are delicate balances and they're very unique to each individual situation. But I think the key practice I have is meditation. I drive
Lovely.
in the car on my own
Mm.
and have no music in the car, sometimes for 2 hours, and really enjoy that. Don't answer the phone, don't listen to anything, and just have a good deep think about stuff.
Very good. Lovely. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We will be publishing more episodes in
Okay.
this sequence in a little while. I'm talking really for the audience now. But I also want to thank all the listeners. I mean, I know there
Oh,
are people out
yeah,
there listening to
absolutely.
this, so I really appreciate it. But thank you so much to you, Paula. It's been great to have you along.
Thank you so much for having me.